So today, we're going to be having fun with FrameNet as an ontology. But by this I mean something very peculiar. Probably anybody who's an ontologist out there is going to say I'm crazy. The subtitle is How FrameNet as a Model Tells Us How to Paraphrase and How to Reason. Another subtitle could be How Michael Ellsworth is Completely Nuts. So, you know, that's fine. I hope I'm entertainingly nuts. So I will appreciate whatever feedback I get from you guys. So we have some preliminaries. Then we're going to discuss the annotation from yesterday. That hopefully you guys took home and did a little bit more. Then after we discuss the annotation, we're going to do a review and exercise on frame relations. So I want us to understand really what's going on, and in the course of that, we're going to do some paraphrase stuff, which, as far as I'm concerned, is what really tells you what the frame-to-frame relations mean. Then we're going to talk about relations to WordNet and to, as I provocatively say, other ontologies. So we have readings, Dolby et al. My office hours are still the same. Your assignment, other than the readings, is to enjoy your weekend. And there is a change of plan here because I could not figure out how the heck to get databases in here today as well. So if you just really need to know about databases, I suggest that you come to the office hours. Because I think most people here don't need to know about MySQL and don't need to know the structure of the database. If you are somebody who needs to know that stuff, I do know some stuff, and I can tell you about it. Okay? So first, let's talk about the homework. First, I just wanted to ask people in general, what did you think? So did people find it easy? Was this easier than what we were talking about before, at least? And were you able to understand what you should do? So hopefully people have done a little bit on this so that we have something to discuss. So, how about you, sitting next to Eli? Yeah.
Oh, what this question?
Just was the exercise
About homework?
Yeah.
Yes.
Was it comprehensible? And do you think that you did okay?
Yes. I saw some LU, for example, early. I had a thought about this adverb because early no. For example, the word doctor, a brief title doctor. I couldn't find this word in FrameNet.
So that's exactly right. The word doctor isn't in FrameNet in this sense. So that's perfect. And in the version that I put on the slides, and I think that was also on the course website, it actually had a little dash next to doctor, meaning it's not there. So that's perfect. As far as early goes, so can I ask, what did you choose a frame for early?
Yes.
Which frame did you choose?
The frame is, wait a moment.
Yeah.
I don't remember, but relation time.
Relative time?
Relative time.
Okay. This was one of the more difficult ones.
the form is temporal subregion.
Ah, yeah,
Yes.
okay, that's correct.
Yes.
Yeah, so temporal subregion is absolutely the correct frame. So this is in the sentence where it's talking about the early 18th century. And so if you're talking about the early 18th century, this is very different than saying I came to class early. So the other frame that we were mentioning, the relative time, would be I came to class early. But as you correctly said, the early 18th century is a temporal subpart of the 18th century. So very good. Okay. So are there, can you pass the microphone?
Tá, tudo bem.
I had a doubt in categorizing
O S na
the
segunda sentência.
S in the second sentence.
E achei fácil
And I thought it easy
categorizar o
Cate-
verbo ser.
categorizing the verb know.
So what was the
Say.
verb S?
Não,
Oh, the verb say. Okay. I see. So you were.
eu percebi isso quando você entrou na sala.
I noticed that when you enter the class, so S,
Isso é tempo relativo.
so relative time,
Não sei.
and I don't know,
Isso não é-
Sorry,
isso não é-
which word in the English?
que palavra no inglês você...
S.
S. I observed.
A frase é I
The
observed
phrase is,
it
I observed it as you enter the room. As, yeah, as,
Sorry,
yeah.
sorry. So I'm sorry. I had an accent problem there. Okay, sorry. Yeah, that one's also not so easy. But, and in fact, that one might even be debatable. So can somebody remind me what the possibilities were for as that the FrameNet database gave? Does somebody have the list of frames from yesterday or no? Okay. I could pull it up. Oh, Thiago has it.
Yes. Let me just find it here. So relative time, temporal collocation, and performers and roles.
Okay.
Okay.
So of these, it's very easy to dismiss performers and roles, right? So no problem there. Then there's relative time, and the last one was temporal collocation. Yes. So the trouble here is that we have both of those frames when we used to only have one of them. And we actually have not done a really good job of cleaning that up. So your confusion is there for a reason, and I actually expected it. But the two frames are different because relative time is supposed to be that, for example, that there's some difference in the times. And temporal collocation is really that they're at the same time. So I think it's clear from the sentence that it's supposed to be at the same time, and so it should be temporal collocation. Okay, so now I'm going to ask just once more whether anybody had anything else that they had a problem with that they thought wasn't clear. Okay.
Claro. We had a doubt here on
No unless
unless
e no how.
and how.
How, na verdade, eu acho que a gente tinha que
How
criar
actually
ou
we
tentar
thought
criar.
about creating or try to find something unless to.
Aí eu fiz, só que
I did it, but
eu acho que não se encaixa.
I don't think it fits
Unless eu coloquei
unless I wrote
não é.
concessive,
Eu acho que a ideia que eu achei mais próxima.
the idea that I thought it was
E
closest,
how?
and
eu
how?
coloquei a barra
I posted the slash
e coloquei reason.
and I put reason.
Aí eu não sei.
I don't know. I had a doubt on that.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I really appreciate it. It sounds like you're going above and beyond. So what I would say is that of those two, how is the easier one for me at least. Um, so at least it's the clearer one from my perspective. In the sentence, it's how can you know that, or something like that. So it's very clear that that fills a means frame element, right? So how is answering the question of what method did you use? And in fact, we can see that although there's some ambiguity of how, right? I mean, how means several different things, that this is really one distinct meaning of how. And so even though it's not in FrameNet right now, how can actually be added into the means frame. We already have a frame for that. And it's doing something very different from the other members of the means frame. Very, very different. And in fact, it should have a semantic type on it to indicate just how different its job is. But it's a pretty okay match for that. For unless, I think you picked out exactly the closest frame. You did a, perfect job, A+. But you're right, it's not actually the correct frame. And you would need to make another frame which is related to that. And you would probably want to make a specific frame for negative conditional or something like that. At the very least, you would want a frame for if. We also don't have if in FrameNet. And so you might be able to put it in the same frame with if, but we don't have that either. So I think, good job. You picked out the very closest one. This is one of those cases where you could spend probably some time figuring out how many things to put in one frame and what granularity to choose. So this is, I would anticipate, one of those frames that would take a while to get exactly right, which is why we haven't done it. All right. A question from Eli. Could you pass the microphone?
I have doubt in almost the same words. Doctor, unless, and how. And I propose as exercise the frame is personal title for doctor and sir. Sir exists in FrameNet as attention getting, but I think the meaning is different from doctor or Mr. or Mrs. And for unless, I propose a conditional frame because I see that there is a causation frame for the word because. Because is a conjunction or use it as a conjunction, and unless as a conjunction, I make a parallel.
Okay.
And for how, I think about maybe a very syntactic frame called interrogating or interrogation, I don't know, to a group lex units or words as how many, how much, what, why, just to feel the necessity as a frame. But I think that how normally, generally, is using with other words. How can, how much, how. But the words are separated, and a propose is interrogate. frame.
Okay. All right. So this actually that's a really interesting proposal. There's a really good reason why we wouldn't do it that way. So in this case, we would really want the members of the frame should be in some kind of substitution relationship with each other. That's the best way to organize a frame, right? So what is it that how is in some kind of substitution relationship with semantically? It's in this kind of how. I mean, there are many kinds of how, as you said. How many is very different from how can you know this. So for this kind of how, it's in a substitution relationship with the preposition by. So I know this by thinking about it, right? So it should be in some frame where by in that use lives. Now, you bring up a very good point, though, that there's a separate component of the meaning, which is the question asking. Now, that is a reference to the speech context. And in general in FrameNet, we have decided to put things that belong to different speech contexts, but denote the same thing in the same frame. And in general, what that means for us is, well, of course, we should recognize the semantic difference, but we're not going to put, for example, we're not going to put something like skedaddle in a different frame from leave, even though skedaddle is a rare word, which is used dialectally, and indicates sort of a humorous tone. There's a lot of conditions on the use of this word that relate to the speech context. But overall, we think that in terms of substitution, that you should compare skedaddle to something like run or leave. So we do that, and then if we want to preserve that other information, that's a cross-cutting distinction, right? I mean, all of the vocabulary will have different conditions based on how formal the language is, different conditions based on, is this to be used in a question? Different conditions based on all of these different considerations. And because it's so cross-cutting, we would really prefer to use a semantic type for that. I will point out that we don't have those semantic types. So we should expand the set in order to be able to cover those things. We also don't have semantic types to tell you something is British versus American, right? I mean, these are all things that are going to be important for some purposes and, you know, not important for others. Okay? All right. Before I move on, does anybody have any other comments, any burning issues that we haven't discussed? Okay, we have in the front.
Na frente.
Eu tenho uma pergunta.
I have a question, a doubt.
Quando eu fui
When
doutor,
when
eu fiquei em dúvida.
I had a doubt, I'd like to know,
Nos Estados
in the
Unidos,
United
você
States,
doutor,
do you
não
use
necessariamente
doctor just
para
for
fazer doutorado,
doctor,
ou para
or
uma
for
pessoa
instance,
que
somebody who
tem-
has a
que é
PhD degree, or for somebody
importante,
who is
porque, às
more
vezes,
important than
aqui no
others?
Brasil,
Because in Brazil,
nós acabamos
we
usando
use
doutor para
doctor
advogado,
for
para
lawyers,
juiz,
for
para
judges,
dentista,
for
promotor,
dentists,
para cargos,
judges,
engenheiro, para cargos que são assim,
engineers,
que são hierarquia
for
normativa.
society roles like that. I'd like.
It's much more limited
It's
in English. It can be used both for, even the abbreviation, as we have in our text, can be used both for people who have a PhD, of whatever kind, and medical doctors. And if you have a law doctorate, then yes, you can also be called doctor, but most of the time people who have a law degree are not. Yeah, it's much more limited. It does depend on your degree, and if you have a medical degree, then definitely. Even if you didn't have a medical degree, but you were practicing medicine, then we could call you doctor, but not DR period. right? So the abbreviation is slightly different from the full word. Okay? Did you still have a question?
Eu tive uma dúvida, o Eli conversou
My doubt is already in. So in how I thought. Oh, I can't hear what you says. Speak closer to the microphone, please.
You need to speak closer to the microphone.
Yeah.
Ok, sorry. Porque
That
eu entendeu how como
I
nada
understood
é
how
can. How
as
seria o quê sem o can? Então,
something that is nothing without can. I put that in italics as I understood in FrameNet, and I thought that can, we could create a frame for can because I couldn't fit the frames that were put here. So I didn't understand your interpretation of the phrase. For instance, for us, how can you say that is the same? How dare you to say that? So I think it's a little bit different from what you said. This can is not a capacity. Are you able to swim? Can you swim, as I would say in English? It's something that regards dareness. How dare you to say that? It's more a negative meaning. So I got this frame on FrameNet. And how as a frame?
I think actually I agree with the case of how dare. Absolutely, that should be an idiom, a multi-word idiom. And I at least don't think that we need an idiom for how can in this case. So I at least think that how can you know that is compositional from the capability and means. But if you have some more specific ideas about how that doesn't work, it would be interesting to talk about them later. So I think we should move on for right now, but that would be interesting to talk about. Okay. All right, so let's get on with the ontologies. Let me wake my computer up. So just to mention again, here we have the various relations of FrameNet. And I'm going to go back through them to really solidify in your mind what's going on with them. Unfortunately, this means I'm not going to go into some of the issues about semantic types that probably the ontologist type people in the audience would like to hear about. They will be covered later on when I'm talking about natural language processing. So don't worry, there will be more detail. All of the relations support paraphrase. But each of them supported differently, right? I mean, if they supported paraphrase in exactly the same way, why would we need different relations? I point this out because most of you are coming from a linguistic direction, or at least a language direction, and all of you can understand language, even if you're not coming from a linguistic direction. So this is a way to sort of confirm intuitions about the relationships, the semantic relationships between two frames. Okay. So first of all, the inheritance relation. This is our very, very careful definition. And one thing that I'm going to emphasize, again, is that the relationship is such that every property of the parent has a correspondent in the daughter. That's going to be really important if people want to do some forms of ontological reasoning, because, for example, if FrameNet doesn't include the pre-stage of some event, you nevertheless should know that it exists as long as whatever this event is, it inherits from the event frame. Because we have a definition of the event frame that says there's a state which exists before the event and a state which exists after the event. We tell you that much. And that reasoning should apply to everything that inherits from event, which is most of FrameNet. But we don't give you a specific frame. And we don't include the precedes relations and all this other stuff in most of those cases. So that means if you want to do reasoning about that, you have to create these frames out of the instructions that we're giving you implicitly. Okay? That also applies to semantic types. That also applies to the frame elements, as I think we've been over several times. So just to remind, one inheritance situation is evading with respect to avoiding. So evading is a kind of avoiding where you're actually moving away from the thing that you don't want contact with. And here you can see that the frame elements are related to each other. Especially for paraphrase, these frame element relations are really important because, you know, just substituting one word for another, you can use WordNet for that. But if you want to actually paraphrase sentences, then you need to know what all the frame elements are and where the corresponding frame element is going to be in the frame that you're paraphrasing to, or in the valence that you're paraphrasing to. So just to remind you, commerce by inherits from getting. So here's a paraphrase example. So if I have a sentence like, I bought a new telephone, then I can paraphrase that as I got a new telephone. Because buying is just a subtype of getting. Whenever we buy something, we get something. Now, maybe we wouldn't say it this way. In English, you would. That would be fine. I know in some languages, you don't use get when you mean buy. But people would agree that it's true, at least. However, the paraphrase in the opposite direction might work sometimes, but you don't know that it works. So if you say, I got a new telephone, maybe you bought it. You know, if I would say in English, if I didn't give you any other information, well, that's how most people get telephones. I mean, they don't usually, like, inherit them from their grandfather or find them on the beach. But that's an inductive conclusion, right? There's an inductive leap. You are adding some information which the language didn't give you in order to paraphrase that way, right? That's a general characteristic of inheritance, or subtyping, or whatever you want to call it. Note that there's this very well-known phenomenon where that relationship switches when you put a negative. So if you say, I didn't get a new telephone, then you know that you didn't buy a new telephone. Because if you negate the, so to speak, if you negate the more informative situation, then you're also negating the less informative one, okay? That's called downward entailment, and if you really care about this stuff, we can talk about it later. Okay, so now we're coming to the exercise portion, the warm-up. The warm-up is that I tell you that self-motion inherits from motion. So think about that for a moment, and then look at these two sentences. I walked along the beach, and the cat ran really fast. So having this this frame relation, what do you know you could paraphrase this as? And I'm going to pick a random victim unless somebody volunteers.
I have some voice problems.
Oh, sorry.
But I didn't thought I didn't get any answers yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in general, the idea is it's hard to see because this projector is tough, but look at the word walk here.
Okay.
Which is in the self-motion frame. What's something much more general than walk that you would know is true? If somebody says they walked, along the beach, then there's some other things that you know that they did. What's more general?
Maybe go, went.
Go is very good, absolutely. So go is a member of the motion frame, and that's exactly what I was looking for. And now pass the mic forward. Yeah. So looking at the second sentence here, what's a paraphrase? I think your job is easier now.
Paraphrase to
motion.
motion.
Yeah. Well, the easy answer is the same one that she gave, that you can generalize run to go, right? So you can say that the cat went really fast. Or does this not work in Portuguese for some reason? I don't know. Okay.
You could use, Michael? Hi. You could use the verb mover.
Yeah, move is also
Okay.
good.
For Portuguese, it would be easier to grasp the idea of more general
Okay.
verb.
So, yeah, move is also in the motion frame. And so that would be one possibility. Okay? All right, now I'm going to make things a little bit more difficult by not telling you what the frames are. But this is so that you really get the idea, right? So in each of the following sentences, what I want you to do is look at the highlighted word, and apparently I'm going to need to tell you which one that is, and generalize to something very abstract that you also know is true whenever you have that word. Okay? So in the first example, if I say the mountain was deserted, the mountain is the one that's highlighted there. So can you pass the mic? Actually, I was about to have her pass the mic. How about you? So what's something more abstract, more general than mountain that works here?
Montanha.
Much more general.
Mais geral.
Relevo.
Relevo.
Terra.
Terra. Relief. Ground.
Say again?
Like a high hill or ground or field, something like this.
Terras.
High hill.
Local.
A place.
O relevo.
A place in a high mountain. Whatever.
Yeah. So
Então,
you have the right
você
intuition,
tem,
especially with the last thing you said. The idea is that a mountain is a kind of place. So in FrameNet, this is captured by the fact that mountain is in the natural features frame, which inherits from the locale frame. And in the locale frame, we have place. Okay? So, right, this is very, very general, right? But, you know, it seems like a very obvious conclusion, but let me put it this way. If you're trying to get a computer to do something, and your question says, you know, was the mountain deserted? And the answer says the place was deserted, and you independently know the place is a mountain, then, you know, the computer can answer the question then. But without this information, it cannot know. Also, in cases of paraphrase, of translation, quite often an exact match doesn't exist. And so you might have to generalize and produce a translation which, while it's not as precise as the original, at least isn't completely false. Does that make some sense? Okay. I'm going to grab the mic, move it back here. Okay. So let's look at the next sentence. We built 3 houses. What's something more general than build?
Talvez
Maybe
fazer.
do, make, produce.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. That's exactly what I
É
was
uma
looking for.
ótima resposta. Era exatamente o que eu queria.
So,
Então,
to make or create.
Para criar ou fazer,
So we have a very
nós
general
temos
creation frame, and inheriting from that is building. So perfect.
muito bom.
Antes desta
Before
última,
this last relation,
no
in
slide
terms of
anterior,
inheritance, in the slide before this one,
eu andei pela praia e o gato pode
the
correr
cat
rápido.
ran fast.
A relação que
The
foi
relation
colocada,
that
Thiago
was
sugeriu
placed and that
mover-se,
Tiago suggested move,
mesmo sendo
even being a reflexive
reflexivo,
because the cat can move fast, I can also say that this is a reflexive action.
Ok.
Okay, obrigado.
I will say this, in English it's not reflexive, but I am aware of from my Spanish knowledge that moverse in Spanish, I guess it works the same way. That if you don't have the reflexive, then it's transitive and you're actually causing something else to move. Okay, that's true. Is that what you were saying?
Yes. Eu só queria... Eu consegui entender claramente
I clearly understood the idea of self-moving and the inheritance. But anyways, now I understood how this relation to insert items, lexical items and words, how can it compose a complete idea in terms of inheritance? I thought it would be just something else in the sentence. I think that we should replace one verb for the other, for another.
What I would say is that, at least in Spanish FrameNet, when they described moverse, they handled it as a single unit. I know that the se is movable, but from a linguistic viewpoint, you need to have both pieces in order to understand it, so considering it as a single unit is okay. And we have lots and lots of cases in English as well, not with the reflexive very much, but we have lots of cases, especially with particles, which drive speakers of Romance languages nuts. So, like the plane took off. And you wouldn't want to, even as the point of view of a native speaker, you wouldn't want to try to separately handle take and off, because the plane isn't taking anything, and yes, it's off the ground, but normally you would have to say off the ground. So it's just completely idiosyncratic and doesn't buy you a lot to try to separately consider the contributions of the two pieces. In the case of se, I know from Spanish that there are some cases of se which are really separable, of course. But at least this kind, in Spanish, they considered together. In Portuguese, it could be different. It could be that moverse is productively generated from the causative. I don't know enough about Portuguese to know. Okay.
In fact, there is a quite simple test you can perform in order to see whether you should consider se as a part of a verb with only one lexical unit or as a separate thing. Because in popular Brazilian Portuguese, people don't use it if it's to be considered part of the verb. So the person would say, o gato moveu muito rápido, in the sense that moveu-se muito rápido. Okay? But if you are, for example, speaking about they looked to each other, então elas se olharam, okay? And you change to elas olharam, then the direct object is missing. So if you erase the pronoun, and it's okay, it's the same sense, then you can consider it as part of the verb in one single lexical unit. But if you erase the pronoun, and then you have a direct object missing, then it's reflexive. Separate things.
Okay. Obrigado.
De nada.
All right. So going to using, I'm going to advertise in advance that this relation is the least useful for paraphrase when you use it by itself. Because the relationship between frames, the using relation is very, very general. It doesn't say very much at all. All it says is that there's one frame which serves as a conceptual background for the other. It doesn't really tell you anything about whether so for example, if I take the verb to owe something, that has a conceptual background of giving. But if I say, you owe me $20, it exactly doesn't mean that you gave me $20, right? So if I say you owe me $20, I mean you should give me $20. But the using relationship won't tell you the part about should. So that's something that you would need to get from the inheritance side. So O should have an inheritance relationship with should. And then you can put it all together if you have all the pieces, but using by itself doesn't get you a lot. I'll give you a couple of examples of things that you can say as a result, but they're very weak. So just an example, volubility uses communication. Now, volubility is where a communicator is rated for their quantity of communication on a topic. So, for example, a word like chatty or gabby. Communication is pretty straightforward. We all know what that is. People talking to other people, that kind of thing. Here you see it represented in FrameNet. There's also the frame to element relations that I don't display here because you can't see anything when you add all of that stuff. So here's an example of a paraphrase. So sometimes, under the right conditions, the paraphrase works. If I say, my brother is chatty about emotions, then that means my brother communicates about emotions. Sometimes it works. But we can all tell that this is not an inheritance relation, right? I mean, communicating is not a subtype of being chatty or something like that. And the only reason why it works is because in the second sentence, it's generic, which happens to be something that chatty has inherently. Also, implicitly in the second sentence is a quantification. It's not specifically said there, but we have a construction which can allow us to understand a quantity when we have a generic. All of that together, the generic construction plus the frame with the using relation can give you a paraphrase. But you wouldn't want to build an automated system that tried to build paraphrases like this. Most of the time, it would fail. In general, what you can say is that communication is relevant for volubility. So if I say that somebody is chatty, what you know is that them talking is relevant for understanding chatty. That's all you know. So just to push on this a little bit, if I say Russell went shopping for a mouse, we definitely don't get a paraphrase like Russell bought a new mouse, right? We just don't know. We know that shopping is related to buying, but if somebody goes shopping, we don't know if they bought anything. However, if we use inheritance relation as well, then we get the third sentence. So Russell went searching for a new mouse to buy. So we know that the purpose frame element of shopping is bound to, identified as, the buying frame. And that's there in the frame-to-frame relation. So when we use inheritance to paraphrase shopping, by going from shopping to the frame it inherits from, which is seeking, then we can paraphrase by making it more general by taking it to seeking, and then making it more specific again by adding in the requirement that the purpose of the seeking is to buy something. Okay? So this is a complex example. In general, the advice is don't try to paraphrase with using without something else. But let's think in not a completely paraphrased way about a couple of examples. So just think about, for each of the following sentences, there's something which is presupposed. There's something which is related to the highlighted target. But it's not an inheritance or anything like that. And I'm going to try just one of these, and I'm going to let whoever wants to pick which one, because this is not very easy. So the three sentences are Brunhilde stole my book, where steal is the target. My mom is really strict, where strict is the target. And the bastards hijacked my car. So in all three cases, there's something which is presupposed, but not completely obvious. This is possibly the hardest relation to get right in FrameNet. Okay, if you could pass the microphone to the woman who is sitting in the back right there.
Lá no fundo.
Não sei, eu acho
I don't know. I think in the third sentence, what preceded is that somebody took the car, right?
So how,
Então,
I'm going to push a
eu
little
vou
bit by saying, how did they
dizer algo
take the
mais.
car?
Como que eles levaram o carro?
Because I mean, they didn't
Porque
pick it up.
eles não
Right,
simplesmente
just...
pegaram no colo e carregaram.
Aí não dá pra saber, né? Eles podem ter arrombado.
Maybe they opened the door with a tool.
In English, if they just do that, and there's nobody there, then we would call it stealing. Hijack has more than that. What else does it have? So what makes stealing different from hijacking, right? Stealing is more general.
Não sei.
Well, I don't know,
Okay,
she said.
pass the microphone back.
Hi.
Hello?
The difference between hijack and steal is because when you hijack something, you are present. The person are present in the hijacking, in this case.
That's absolutely one difference. So pass the microphone just next to you. So one correct answer. This should be okay. Think about what are the things that you can hijack. What are the set of things that you can
São
hijack?
grupo de pessoas de coisas que podem ser sequestradas. Anything I can hijack?
Pessoas.
Well, people.
Eu posso sequestrar pessoas.
I can hijack people.
Animais, talvez.
Animals,
não sei.
maybe.
Não sei bem a
I don't
diferença
know
de
exactly
sequestrar e
the
roubar,
difference between
né?
steal
Como
and
ela falou, eu
hijack.
acho que-
Okay.
You have chosen a fantastic example.
That doesn't work in Portuguese.
Yes.
Ah, excellent.
Because in Portuguese, the approximate translation and the translator is correct giving to all of you is sequestrar. Okay, but sequestrar is also kidnap.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so you can hijack in this sense or kidnap people, animals,
well, then
or a car in the sense that you are taking it in the presence of its
the person.
owner
Yep.
and taking it somewhere else.
Yep.
Probably some place where you're going to hide it. Because in Portuguese, sequestrar means also that...
To sequester, yeah.
Yes, the thing is going to be hidden after.
Yep, hidden, yeah. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. That makes it more difficult, doesn't it? So I'll just finish this off by saying, in English, that the word hijack presupposes a vehicle. You cannot hijack anything that cannot move. So that's a really specific word, but we actually have a bunch of different words that all evoke that same idea, which is why we have the frame in English. So it's not just that we have that one word, we also have carjack and a bunch of other things. So in general, the last example in English is actually in some ways the easiest one, because there's a very rich scene where someone comes to a car. Usually they will threaten violence, so violence is also presupposed. Not that someone commits violence, they might only threaten violence, but it's presupposed. There's also the owner is present, so presence is presupposed, and that's true in Portuguese sequestrar as well. But then there's also the presupposition that they will move somewhere. So there's a huge number of things in this case, okay? And you can see how you might be able to paraphrase something in context with any of those things. But then again, you might not. And in the case of Portuguese, if you wanted to translate this English sentence, you would need to get those presuppositions in somehow. Subframe relations. These ones I think most people can understand pretty okay. There's an event. It's a big event. It's got subparts. There's really nothing more to it. Just keep in mind that all of those things that I mentioned are frames. The big event is a frame. The subparts are frames. Precedes relation, which usually goes with the subframe relation, tells you those parts. Well, if they have some kind of sequence, then this will tell you what that sequence is. Note that not everything has temporal ordering. So when you buy something, that's part of a bigger scene. And in that scene, there's two exchanges. There's the goods transfer, there's the money transfer. Most of the time, you can do in either order. It doesn't matter. I give you the money, you give me the stuff, or you give me the stuff and then I give you the money, whatever. It's all buying. But in other cases, the sequencing is really, really important. So in America, at least, we cannot put somebody on trial before they've had an arraignment. It's in fact definitional for trial in the United States. So you might want to know that. You also, anywhere in the world, cannot have a trial without the accusation of a crime. It just doesn't even make any sense, right? So you would want to put those in sequence. So, I thought I had defined these, sorry. Apparently I did here. So falling asleep precedes being asleep. This is an example of frames that are in sequence, right? Whenever somebody falls asleep, that's pretty straightforward. There's just one frame element. That's why I choose this example. There's somebody, and they go from being awake to being asleep. That's the definition of the frame. It's also what this relation is about, because being asleep is the next part of the scene. Here you see a little picture. This is just to point out, we really did have some confusion the other day. These black arrows are the precedes relations. And unfortunately, right here, this makes this look like a double-headed arrow that goes between these two, but it really isn't. I checked the relations in a different way using the frame report. And in that report, I can see that this arrow goes here, and it produces this head. And unfortunately, they completely overlap here, so it looks like there's a double-headed arrow. Okay, so this makes sense. You go from being awake to getting up, which actually does not have a clear relationship with waking up. You know, so the waking up happens, and then there's being awake. From being awake, you can go to falling asleep, and from that you can go to sleep, and then you can go to waking up. Okay, so you have all this stuff, and they're in a sequence, and they repeat, and there's no problem with that. Now how do I use it for paraphrase? Well, if I say she was asleep, then I can say she fell asleep before that. So notice that in general, we can, In general, we can say that the later frame entails the earlier frames, with the additional implication that the time is different. Okay? So that lets us paraphrase. So, here we have paraphrase relations. These should be two different, okay? Are you speaking Portuguese or English?
Can be in English.
Okay.
Can I go with the second one? It's
Yeah,
the easiest
you
one.
can.
Yeah. So the rain stopped. It was raining.
Yes. What's something else that involves an extra verb?
Another verb?
Mm-hmm. So think what I could replace stop with. So what comes even before it was raining?
Beginning?
Exactly. So start comes before action, comes before end. I mean, it's very straightforward, but, you know, we put it there explicitly, and we have that in FrameNet. Okay. Pass the microphone forward, and let's see if somebody can see what happens before stumbling.
Well, I really don't know what means stumbled.
So,
okay. So it is, was walking. The horse was walking.
yeah. Or running, or going somehow. But in general, this means to have some difficulty while you're walking. Maybe you didn't fall over, maybe you did fall over, but you have some difficulty. Okay. All right. So